Recording has started.
Morning, everyone. We'll just give it a minute while folks connect to the webinar, and then we'll get started. Okay, it looks like folks are still trickling in, so we'll give it a couple minutes. Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Broadband for All Roundtable for Tribal Governments. My name is Christina Snyder, and I'm a member of the Dry Creek Rancheria Band of Pomo Indians and the Tribal Advisor for Governor Gavin Newsom. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you from the ancestral homelands of the Nishinan and Miwok peoples. I'd also like to give an enormous thank you to the California Tribal Chairpersons Association and all of our tribal, state, and federal partners who are here to help participants navigate the major cross-jurisdictional opportunities available right now. A few items before we begin. The webinar has been opened in listen-only mode. Chat will be used by the hosts to provide links and information referenced during the presentation. Questions will be answered after the completion of the presentations, so you're encouraged to use the Q&A function to submit your questions. A recording of this roundtable and the slides will be available on the Broadband for All portal. The link will be provided in the chat. And again, we know there's several tribal nations who are watching a live stream of a hearing right now, so we'll be providing them the link to this recording as well so that they have it for their benefit. Presenters, please let Jeffrey know to advance your slides when speaking. We have a full agenda today and respectfully request speakers to keep allocated timeframes, and attendees are reminded to use Q&A for their questions. During Governor Newsom's time in office, he's demonstrated a willingness and a commitment to do better for California Native communities. The state, in partnership with the federal government, is currently in a position to work to address long-term inequities, address the needs and priorities of Native people, and reorient how we think about our collective future in partnership and strength. In the last few months, we have been able to expand our ability to engage in cooperative discussions and consultations with tribal partners, using hybrid methods to reach all corners of the state. As we have shifted toward more phone and internet-based styles of doing business, we still see some tribes struggle with more than others to engage effectively based on real limitations to infrastructure on tribal lands. And we've seen where tribal communities have come together to help each other and others. We've seen tribal communities enter into direct partnerships with service providers, enter into cooperative intertribal markets, and really leverage the opportunities of a hybrid world. Today, we will hear from our partners about how the work of the Broadband for All is being deployed using an equity lens, that not all communities are in the same position, whether because of infrastructure gaps, historical inequities and dispossession, or cultural differences. And we hope that we're being responsive to those differences. We're recording this webinar for the benefit of all tribal nations. So again, as you engage with the panels today, please remember that we're recording and we encourage you not to share any proprietary or confidential information that you would not want to be made publicly available. Now, it is my honor and pleasure to introduce Chairman Bo Mazzetti from the Rincon Band of Luiseno Indians, who serves as chairman of the California Tribal Chairpersons Association. Mr. Mazzetti was the driving force behind the establishment of the association, which has been our partner throughout this administration in bringing the state together with California tribal nations, and he will deliver some remarks as well. Chairman.
Good morning. First, I want to thank the governor and the state for reaching out to the tribes throughout the state. It wasn't that long ago, not many of us really knew when you use the word in term broadband. Would have learned a lot about what broadband is, what it can do for our communities, and especially opening up the world to our young people as far as the communications and research tool. So it's extremely important. This is, I think, one of the very few times in history that there's looked like ample funding to really help the tribes get into this whole new area of what we call broadband. So I'm thrilled to learn more about it, and really appreciate the governor of the state for reaching out like you have, to try to educate and work with the tribes and find, more than anything, find that funding source. That's one thing we all have problems with, funding. So I can't thank the state enough for what they're doing. I know we're just really pleased with what the state has done. I want to thank the governor and the staff, all the state staff that are working with our tribes. And again, thank you on behalf of the tribes of California. We thank you for opening up. Okay. Justine, are you still there?
Thank you, Chairman. I believe, Scott, we're handing it back to you.
Yeah, well, Christina, Commissioner Howe from the Public Utilities Commission is here, and she would like to say a few words before we begin.
Oh, perfect. Then I will go ahead and say it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Commissioner Howe from the PUC, who is a colleague and a friend and has been making great strides in her role at the PUC as an appointee of Governor Newsom. So Commissioner Howe, if you could deliver a few remarks this time.
Thank you, Christina. I'm really honored to be here today. And good morning, everyone. As Christina said, I am Darci Howe, Commissioner at the California Public Utilities Commission. I was appointed by Gavin Newsom in February of 2021. I'm the assigned commissioner for our California Advanced Services Fund, or CASF rulemaking, one of two critical rulemakings in which our broadband policy is developed and implemented. The second proceeding is our Broadband for All proceeding, which is led by our commission president, Alice Reynolds, and my office is partnered with her office on that rulemaking. I'm also assigned the assigned commissioner for the PUC's tribal order instituting rulemaking that is looking at our tribal policies in more detail. In this role, I have been and will continue to hold tribal consultations to meet with tribes throughout California to discuss our processes and policies and to hear from California tribes on energy and telecommunications matters. Broadband is always a topic of interest when we're meeting with tribes, and I urge any of the tribes listening today to reach out to schedule a consultation with my office or to reach out to our tribal advisor, Ken Holbrook, and we can help provide more detailed and specific information regarding your tribe's circumstances and our programs. As in so many areas of public policy and resource allocation, tribal communities have been left behind historically when it comes to broadband and reliable communication services. With the governor's Broadband for All initiative, there's currently opportunities to access resources to deploy communication infrastructure throughout California Indian country, and for tribes to deploy their own communications infrastructure. Local and tribal owned broadband networks have an enormous role to play in ensuring safety and opportunity for all California communities. Our communications director, Rob Osborne, and Karen Eckersley from our communications division staff are going to present to you later today on the CPUC's actions to implement Governor Newsom's 2021 broadband package. Many of our programs, which will be described in these presentations, are designed to provide support for tribes and local governments and network development, deployment, and adoption at various stages along the way. I look forward to hearing from California tribes as to how the commission is best able to support you in assessing these resources and how we can work with you in furthering your individual community goals. I also encourage, again, that you reach out to my office and participate in our regional consultations, because we are very excited about working with you and making sure that you're able to access these important and critical programs. And so with that, I want to turn it back to Christina, who has been just an amazing partner in supporting our efforts to get resources to tribes. And I just want to note that our staff will be here for the remainder of the day. I need to get to our voting meeting, but wanted to make sure I was here to provide this information. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Commissioner. I'm now pleased to introduce Scott Adams, Deputy Director of the Office of Broadband and Digital Literacy from the California Department of Technology.
Thank you, Christina. And hello, everyone. It's such an honor and a privilege to be assembled with you all today, our partners in the tribal nations and tribal lands here in California. I also want to thank Christina Snyder for her leadership and putting together this event. I want to thank Chairman Mazzetti for his words and Commissioner Howe and the PUC for the great work that they continue to do in California on broadband. Can we please put the slides up? Thank you. And actually, could you take go back one slide, please? To the, actually the agenda. I don't think we covered this, but as Christina said, we have a lot to cover today. We wanted to give you an update on the just the overall Broadband for All program and the various components, including the Middle-Mile Broadband Initiative, the Last Mile Adoption program update from the PUC, hear an update about the Affordable Connectivity Program, which is really essential to increasing affordability and the adoption of broadband, and then hear a federal funding program update from our federal partners. And as was mentioned, they'll, because there's so much content here, we're going to go through the presentations and then do a question and answer at the end of the session. And so we see folks are already starting to submit questions. Please keep those going. Okay, thank you, Jeffrey. Could you go back? So as Christina mentioned, I just want to say I am Scott Adams, the Deputy Director of Broadband and Digital Literacy at the Department of Technology. As Christina mentioned, the governor's Broadband for All and the state's Broadband for All program is really based on increasing access to broadband infrastructure and service, increasing affordability and adoption of internet as a tool for education and access to a variety of service. And then, you know, the equity lens is so important and really increasing digital equity inclusion. Next slide. The Broadband for All program itself and what our office is really involved in is working with the California Broadband Council to implement the governor's broadband executive order, to implement the broadband action plan, and to develop and oversee the state's Middle-Mile Broadband Initiative. Next slide. Just wanted to call out that in regards to the Broadband Council, this is really you know, an all hands on deck collaborative effort from the state. For those of you who may not know, it's a 12-member agency that includes, you know, our office and the PUC, the Office of the Tribal Advisor, California Emerging Technology Fund, the Transportation Agency, State Library, and you know, their collaborative work has been really important since 2010 in driving deployment of broadband and adoption throughout the state in unserved areas as defined by the Public Utilities Commission. Next slide. As I mentioned, the governor's executive order in response to COVID really changed and reframed the Broadband Council and the state's efforts on broadband and required the development of a broadband action plan. Next slide. That action plan was developed really in 4 months during the pandemic, and it was completed in December of 2020, but it's aligned around 3 main goals, and that's that all Californians have high performance broadband available at home, schools, libraries, and businesses, that all Californians have access to affordable broadband and necessary devices, and that all Californians can access training and support to enable digital inclusion. Next slide. The items that the Department of Technology is, while we're working with the partners to complete the implementation of the action plan, we're leading on 6 of those. The first is to work to enhance permitting at all levels of government. The next is to identify state properties that could possibly enable broadband infrastructure deployment, both on middle and last mile projects. We're working to promote state contractual vehicles to support cost savings and efficient purchasing of broadband services and equipment. Working to promote, track, and publicly report the progress of adoption and affordable internet services. Now with the Affordable Connectivity Program, that's really going to be front and center of these efforts, but we are going to be continuing to promote pairing the Affordable Connectivity Program with other available low-cost offers, developing multiple or a multi-layer network of digital inclusion stakeholders. This Broadband for All Roundtable is one of the 4 roundtables that we've done in the last several weeks, and will continue to convene these at least on a quarterly basis. And then finally, we've established a Broadband for All portal to enable access to a multitude of stakeholders and partners throughout the state and serve as a central repository for broadband information. Next slide, please. Next, I want to hand it over to my colleague, Elizabeth Dewar at Caltrans, to talk about really in the context of the action plan and Broadband for All, the state's acknowledgement of the importance of broadband deployment consultation. Elizabeth?
Thank you, Scott. Good morning to all of you. It's great to be here today, and I would like to extend my thanks to the California Department of Technology for inviting me to speak with you today about Caltrans's part in deploying and expanding broadband access throughout California. This includes collaborating with our state partners to identify opportunities toward achieving goals that further the governor's Broadband for All initiative. As part of the Broadband for All initiative, Caltrans has been promoting and implementing Dig Smart policies to allow for co-location of underground conduits within Caltrans right-of-way to serve broadband needs. These Dig Smart policies present an opportunity to lower the capital cost of broadband infrastructure deployment and minimize disruption caused by ongoing construction, both incentivizing and expediting new investment. Caltrans is also focused on the broadband middle mile network that will serve as the backbone infrastructure to support the last mile effort to bring broadband to as many Californians as possible. Caltrans's role in the middle mile effort is to carry out the environmental review and project delivery for the placement of broadband infrastructure within the right-of-way of the state highway system. This environmental and project delivery work will be conducted similarly to how we deliver our transportation projects. Caltrans will continue to reach out to tribal governments through our district Native American coordinators and cultural and environmental specialists to consult with tribes on the individual broadband middle mile projects in the districts throughout the state. The Broadband for All is an enormous statewide endeavor, the intent of which is to provide greater connectivity in areas of the state that are lacking in broadband infrastructure and access. And particularly, the Middle Mile Initiative also has an extremely aggressive schedule for delivery. The efforts involved in delivering these fast-moving projects throughout California will have potential impacts to the environment, including natural and cultural resources that will need to be addressed and assessed either through avoidance or mitigation. It's important for tribes to have the information necessary to balance environmental impact considerations with the benefits of broadband access for communities. It's also important that the participants here today are familiar with the state's Broadband for All efforts, including the Middle Mile Initiative, to be prepared for when Caltrans does reach out to work together with you to put the infrastructure in place to bring service to tribal communities. Caltrans is focused on closing the digital divide for residents and businesses and enabling Caltrans to use technological innovation to improve the safety and mobility of California travelers. We're thrilled to be part of these ongoing efforts to identify locations without broadband access, forecast the future demand for broadband, and deployment throughout the state. We appreciate the opportunity today's meeting provides to share the various aspects of the efforts in which state and tribal governments will actively engage. Caltrans looks forward to our continued partnerships, and thank you again for inviting me today. Scott?
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Appreciate your comments. Okay, and the great work that Caltrans is doing on this. Can we put the slides back up? Or actually, we don't have to put the slides back up. What we wanted to do is have Cole Prisabilla of our staff just do a quick demonstration of the state's Broadband for All portal, which is intended to really put all of the information about the Broadband for All program and the various initiatives into one place. Cole, can you do that, please?
Yeah. Good morning, all, and thank you, Scott, for that introduction. You should be seeing my screen now, which shows the Broadband for All website. And we've had, like Scott said, this is the central repository of information. And if you're looking for information regarding the last mile, middle mile projects, as well as a tracker that shows us how we're doing in terms of the action plan and executive orders. But really, we want to highlight 3 resources this morning, which is under the Partners tab, which is the planning, funding, and affordable services. In terms of those that you may help that are looking for internet service, this is a great tool you can put in your zip code and find some offers that'll help. And especially when it comes to affordable connectivity program, which we'll learn about a little bit later on with California Emerging Technology Fund. In terms of planning, we have a page that has some toolkits and resources. And one that I would really like to highlight this morning is from the NTIA, which was released on how to build a broadband roadmap for local and tribal governments, including this one, which is specifically for tribal resources. And finally, if you are looking for funding in terms of deployment, we put together a really great tool, which is still in its kind of first iterations, and we'd love your feedback on all of these tools. And you can come to this page, say, I work with a tribal entity, and we're looking to do some deployment. And this will then show you all of those resources that are specific to what you're looking for. Again, this is a website that we're building, and we would look for your input, and especially as it comes to those that are coming towards planning. And please provide us information, and you can do that through the Contact Us page. With that, I'll stop sharing screen and have that as our quick overview of the Broadband for All portal. Scott, back to you.
Thanks, Cole, so much. And just wanted to stress that this was a short update on the state's efforts on the Broadband for All action plan, which really, includes a set of policy process improvements, identification of funding and stakeholder and partner, convening and coalition building. Our next presenter, Mark Monroe, and Golden State Net are going to talk about significant investments that the state are making on the middle mile. Mark?
Good morning. Yes, Mark Monroe, I'm the Deputy Director for the Middle-Mile Broadband Initiative. Appreciate everybody joining us this morning. And this is the, we can go on to the next slide here, but this is the initiative that was enacted by SB 156 last year as part of the overall 2021 Budget Act. And the Budget Act provided $6 billion over 3 years to expand infrastructure, which is expected to increase affordability and enhance access for broadband for all Californians. It includes $3.25 billion for CDT to develop and primarily or largely construct an open access middle mile network throughout the state along the state highway system. And it provides $2.75 billion for last mile infrastructure grant programs to be administered by the Public Utilities Commission. And that includes $2 billion to go out to grant recipients for construction of infrastructure. Next slide. In terms of SB 156, And the rules it assigns the CDT is to oversee the acquisition and management and contracts for the development of the overall network. It establishes a single point of contact, which is my position, the deputy director for the MMBI. And then establishes a middle mile advisory committee to monitor the project. And that meets, the next meeting of that is tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. And you can get the link to that on our website. But those have been held every month since the bill was passed in July. These have been held every month since then, and they will be held monthly until the end of until I think this next August, when they go to a quarterly basis. And the last thing is SB 156 required us to retain a third-party administrator with experience in the industry, and that is Golden State Net, who will be presenting shortly here. Next slide. So as noted, SB 156 lays out the roles and responsibilities, and CDT oversees the project. The Public Utilities Commission has been provided valuable input in a public process for really identifying where the unserved and underserved locations are throughout the state. The Golden State Net has that valuable lens of having operated a system and understanding, going from really connecting points on a line to developing a broader network that operates and is reliable for all the last mile providers. And of course, Caltrans is a very important partner because they would do the majority of the construction in terms of going through the pre-construction process. This is going to be important for everybody to understand that frequently takes 2 years or more. But to go through all of the design, the permitting, and environmental work, and as well as the surveying and all the planning for the project. So they're going to be, the project leans heavily on Caltrans's expertise in this area. And that's why we mentioned finance. They obviously handle the budget side of it. And because all of these funds are federal ARPA funds, they also are managing the reporting of all those funds to the U.S. Treasurer statewide. Next slide. Real quick, the MMAC started by establishing 3 guiding principles. Obviously we want to provide open, affordable open access middle mile broadband infrastructure that really enables the last mile connectivity. As most people are aware, last mile is where that's what affects all of us. That comes to our houses and our businesses. The middle mile is really designed to connect all of those communities back to the core of the World Wide Web. Number 2, we want to build a network expeditiously and leverage existing infrastructure where feasible. And so think of that when we go ahead and build, there's a certain cost associated with that. The $3.25 billion provided by SB 156, was not anticipated at the time to be sufficient to build all of what was estimated at the time to be 8,100 miles. So there is anticipated that where there is existing infrastructure to do IRU leases, we're going to take that into account. We'll be talking a little, and so that's another layer of, or another tool we have in developing the network. And obviously we want to prioritize connectivity to unserved and underserved communities and community institutions. Next slide. In terms of the project and the timeline, it really comes out in phases. We started with the PUC having held their public proceeding last August and September, and they put out maps in December and March of this year to really refine and help articulate where the network would need to go and kind of how to serve the unserved. At the same time, we've been working with Golden State Net and Caltrans on to design and engineer the system. And then as we move forward and kind of select that broader process, Caltrans has already begun a lot of its pre-construction work on the initial 18 that were announced 18 segments that were announced last November, as well as the broader anchor build. And I think we'll be talking about that as well. Next slide. So this is really just a kind of a chart to show the expenditure pattern, where the vast majority of the costs are going to be related to Caltrans doing construction, so they incur in the out years. As Caltrans ramps up pre-construction and gets projects ready to deliver, again, that process can take 2 years normally, and so that puts us out into 2024 as we really start to ramp up the larger amount of construction, and that's when you'll see most of the funds spent. Next slide. So as noted, these are the $3.25 billion is all federal ARPA funding. ARPA funds must be signed or under contract and encumbered by December of 2024, which is a very tight time frame. If you add the 2 years for Caltrans pre-construction work to now, that puts us that already puts us into 2024. So just to help folks understand the time pressure there. And then ARPA funds have to be spent and the project completed by December 2026. So this all the planning is and development of the project as well as construction all have to be done very quickly. And so as noted, the $3.25 billion was originally estimated to be roughly enough to build about 6,000 of what was estimated at the time to be an 8,000 miles network. So we'll be exploring leases as an alternative to that, and as well as announcing a map tomorrow that is going to be larger than the initial 8,000 miles. Next slide. With that, I'll turn it over to our partners at Golden State Net.
Thank you, Mark. Eric Hunsinger here, Vice President of Infrastructure, and Matt Rantanen has joined me today, Senior Advisor, Tribal Broadband to Golden State. We've got a short amount of time, so I'm going to jump right into it, if that's okay, Matt. Next slide, please. We're part of the third-party administrator named in SB 156, Golden State Net, and we're assisting CDT, Deputy Director Mark Monroe and Deputy Director Scott Adams, as well as Secretary Tong, in finalizing the design of the network and making this statewide network available to all constituents within the state of California, making it a viable and resilient network. Next slide. So I can't cover all of these things, but we, we'll hit the highlights here. We leverage the CPUC anchor map, which is widely available on many of the state websites, as a kind of a beginning point to analyze where recommended locations were needed. It's pretty much every corner of the state. Underserved and then unserved communities were a top priority for this network. So leveraging that route, those recommended routes, and developing truly workable topology of network rings, making resilience and redundancy a top priority. In addition to that, the goal is to underground the network so that it is resistant to environmental hazards, fire, or avalanche, or whatever might be in a particular area, so that it's protected and contiguously running for the constituents. So you'll see this theme throughout the slide presentation. In addition to that, the network topology requires amplification of services. So we've developed a method to provide a lit service throughout the network, and we require about every 50 miles of capabilities to amplify that network and provide lit services throughout the entire system. Next slide, please. Primarily, we're using Caltrans right away. Caltrans owns a substantial amount of real estate. They also have a very robust project management and procurement arm. And so partnering with Caltrans is a logical step into accomplishing the statewide goal of implementing this network. As Mr. Monroe noted, we will evaluate IRUs where it makes sense, perhaps reduce time to cost, but those IRUs would only be feasible in areas where cost reduction is a priority and time to market's a priority, and the contractual terms are important. They have to be usable by the network in ways that will allow interconnection and flexibility for last mile purposes. Next slide, please. Finally, here, we're going through an optimization process, buy versus build, with CDT, Deputy Director Mark Monroe and Deputy Director Scott Adams. We're evaluating how the budget can accomplish the greater goal of constructing the network for the state. I want to be very clear about this. The state of California is developing a future-proof network, meaning we don't have the same goals as a commercial carrier. The goal here is to develop a network where anybody can access the network. Any entity can come and avail themselves of the system that the state of California has put in place. And how is that accomplished? We have a philosophical approach of allowing interconnection every 2,500 feet. And what that means is that if an entity is not ready today, the state has developed a system that will be ready tomorrow for any entity that wants to interconnect to the network, allowing connectivity and broadband for those who are working to develop plans now or tomorrow to take advantage of what the state is constructing. Next slide, please. I'm going to quickly go through the various regions as defined by the Golden State Net for the network. Here we call out the Caltrans districts associated with those regions. Next slide, please. Region 1, we're moving north to south. It's not in any particular order, it's just geography. Some highlights are that it's a vast geographical area. It's very difficult to construct, but we have some key partnerships, some with tribal entities and some with Siskiyou Telephone, which is the rural local exchange carrier in that area. Matt, if you want to share some items.
Sure, thanks, Eric. So I'm actually coming to you from the Yurok Reservation today. I'm participating and supporting the Yurok Nation in a tribal broadband boot camp. We are on day 3 of that. We have other guest tribes. The Hoopa Valley tribe is here, as well as Bear River, and we're talking broadband and concepts around broadband. And just it's very eye-opening to be in the region and understand the lack of connectivity here. And these Golden State Network middle mile opportunities come at a perfect time where there's money to build out the last mile piece of the network on the reservation itself, but there isn't maybe enough money to build the connector piece to get to the rest of the world. And this Golden State Network is providing that fiber infrastructure throughout the state of California to be able to connect our regional networks together. So this is, key timing. And in this region, 2 of these tribes are in a position to actually be partner builders or joint builders in their advanced stages of broadband development. And as we move through the state and talk to other tribes, these opportunities arise where a tribe is very proficient in construction and utility management, and could be a great asset to the Golden State Network. Thanks, Eric.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, key points: economic development opportunity, not just in collaboration with building, but also enabling broadband opportunities to stimulate economics is a top priority. Next slide, please, Jeffrey. So here are the Caltrans districts. I apologize, I'm going to accelerate this just a bit. Next slide. Here are highlights of the demographic, unserved and underserved, residential, non-residential. You'll note that some key locations are noted for tribal areas here in this map. Next slide. This was part of the original 18. As network design goes through an engineering process and evaluation process in collaboration with CDT, this picture has evolved. This was initially just preliminary projects, not meant to be a full network design, but to showcase how we might work together with CDT, Caltrans, and the communities to define networks in a variety of solutions. Next slide. And here's an overlay of the network as we're proposing today. and the populations. You can see that there's key collaborations, as Matt noted, with HOOPA and the UROC that we hope to put in place to solidify connectivity and connect to this remote area of the world with the larger telecom world. Next slide. And here's the CPUC originally proposed routes. Can we move to Region 2, please? Again, Region 2 is a very similar story. Densely populated urban areas are an exception. That's a new element. And then sparsely populated mountainous regions, fire hazards, environmental hazards. And then there's a key element here of while there's maybe broadband network, there's socioeconomic factors at work in some areas of this region. Next slide. The Caltrans districts as denoted in the region. Next slide, please. And here, the urban population. I'm going to go ahead and ask you to go ahead and move 2 slides ahead. Thank you. One more slide. Thank you. Some of this information may seem somewhat redundant, but what I want to point out here, I'm going to cover a couple of elements. One of the most technologically advanced areas of the world is Silicon Valley, right there in the Bay Area. And you can see that many folks have been left behind in this area. Some of that is socioeconomic and availability of broadband in a cost-effective manner. In addition to that, there's very rural mountainous regions to the east. All of those have been proposed as connecting to the eventual network that the state's going to establish. Next slide, please. Region 3, again, dense urban areas and sparsely rural populated areas. Fire hazards again. I want to point out that yet another major tribal relationship potential lies in this region. Matt, do you want to share anything regarding that?
Yeah, can we go to the map, the next slide?
Yes, please. Next slide, please. The next slide.
There we go. So you can see the big green reservation indicator, and that's Tule River. And then actually, if we can go to the next slide that shows some of the route.
One more slide.
One more.
Yeah.
You can see the Caltrans right of ways supported there with a network design proposal, and the fact that Tule River is actually away from a Caltrans right of way. And what we're seeing throughout the state of California is that, you know, it's getting close to like a third or half of tribes that are not on a Caltrans right of way. So looking at solutions where those tribes aren't exactly on the roadway to be able to get access to this broadband infrastructure, you know, creating unique partnerships and solution sets with each of the tribes as these situations arise, and as we do outreach and communication with each of the tribes to understand their needs, their timing, you know, whether or not they're prepared to, you know, get access to a middle mile network today, whether they have plans in the works that, you know, will be something that's built out in the next year to 2 years, or whether or not they're still trying to determine what their broadband, you know, management future will be. So, you know, in having those conversations, we're understanding the need directly from the tribes, and you know, making solution sets together to make sure that, you know, these issues are overcome. So thanks, Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Matt brings up a really good point. What he painted there was a picture of we're ready today to engage with any tribal entities that might have a priority, but we're not leaving anyone behind. The philosophical approach of this network is to put in interconnection points every 2,500 feet where constructed, meaning if 8 years down the road, any entity would wish to take advantage of the state network, we're going to put in place mechanisms for that to happen. Next slide, please. This slide just shows the CPUC recommended middle mile routes, and some of these elements are very close to the Golden State recommended routes. The idea is that in last mile CASF grants, These additional routes could be added in as funding is developed to create a more robust last mile network. Please move to the next slide. Region 4, another densely populated urban area. Again, a similar theme to the Silicon Valley area is socioeconomic factors come into play in this region. There's significant joint build opportunities that we've identified, as noted earlier by Deputy Secretary Mark Monroe. Joint build opportunities are being evaluated in this process, as well as potential IRUs. But the top priority is to get a large quantity of fiber into every corner of the state. Next slide, please. Here are the Caltrans districts. Please go to the next one. And here again, the urban areas. The Los Angeles area, the city of Los Angeles, you can see underserved and desperate need of quality broadband relief. Next slide, please. Here was some part of the original proposal of just a sample project. And if we could jump 2 slides ahead, that'll keep us on time. Thank you. Here I want to note this is the potential for construction fiber. We're through the coordination with CDT, we'll evaluate where and how best to solve some of these. If we can work with commercial entities for a joint build, that would be great. Of special note, we've identified commercial potentials to partner to Catalina Island. There's some commercial interests in connecting that island directly. And interestingly enough, there's numerous underserved communities there as well. Next slide. This will be the last region. Here again, densely populated urban areas, as well as desert regions and mountainous regions, a real mix. There are tribal entities. I'll allow Matt to describe that as we get into the maps. And then there's significant opportunities to connect with major telecom hubs in this area. Next slide, please. Here's the districts, really diverse terrain. Next slide. And again, a picture of the population or lack thereof. Many of these areas, even though densely populated, they do require some sort of connectivity. Next slide. Here's the original proposal for just some projects, not the statewide network. And if we could jump 2 slides ahead, and I'll hand it over to Matt to speak to some of this.
Thanks, Eric. We have a couple questions in the chat that I'll address as well. So that there was a question on whether tribes that were not represented on the map. Actually, all the tribes are represented on the map. The presentation size doesn't allow them to be as visible as they need to be. So they're all addressed in green, like you see on this map. But some of them, the sheer acreage size makes the dot so small that it doesn't show up on screen. So the maps that we have are accurate and actually identify all 109 federally recognized tribes. So we are working with a list of everyone. And then the question of whether or not, what tribes are eligible to get connectivity to this. All tribes are eligible to connect to this Golden State Network. Some tribes will be closer to the opportunity than others, but there will be funding efforts through the state of California, funding efforts through the federal government that will allow you to, identify funding that can build the connector piece from your reservation to the Golden State Network. If the Golden State Network doesn't come to your front door because it's the way it's designed on Caltrans right-of-ways or restrictive right-of-ways, that it may not be sitting at your front door. So we'll figure out the difference, through some other programs, and we'll help align tribes as we talked with them with that funding opportunity and potential solution set. As some of you know, I work with Southern California Tribal Chairmen's Association, and they have graciously put me on loan with Golden State Network for a few months to help with this project. And so I'm very familiar with Southern California and for the last 21 years. And, you can see there's a lot of tribes here, and the proposed network solves a lot of those problems of lack of connectivity, lack of access to middle mile fiber. As you see, it goes by nearly every reservation in Southern California space. So Golden State is making a concerted effort to draw the line as close to tribes as possible and to present those solutions in development with each of the tribes. And if I just wanted to kind of close, since we're in the last region, if you haven't heard from me or someone from Golden State yet, and you will be hearing from Caltrans as well in outreach for some logistics, please feel free to reach out. I believe all our contact information is available through the California Department of Technology, and Scott and team can make that available to folks. But we're here to have a conversation and talk about solutions for your communication needs. Thank you.
Just two more bits, and then we'll hand it back to CDT. We're actively looking at commercial collaborations in this area for IRUs and potential joint builds. But more interestingly is that we're working closely with the Coachella Valley Association of Governments. I believe there's a few tribal entities on that board. We're working to do a joint build around the Coachella Valley. So it's an important opportunity to work with the community directly in a solution set there. If you go to the next slide, I believe you'll see the statewide proposed map is still being evaluated. Some of these routes may not appear. There's additional routes being added as we speak. And now I'll hand it back to Deputy Director Mark Monroe. Thank you.
All right, next slide. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, real quick, I'm going to jump to the next slide here. I just want to say I appreciate all of GSN's work on putting that together. Going forward here, our goal at CDT is to combine the work of the PUC and GSN and get together a broad map to have Caltrans start their pre-construction work. Again, that goes back to that 2-year time frame. And then at the same time, we'll be going back, as Eric had mentioned, going back and looking at the where existing infrastructure can be leased to help fill in the gaps. And then as Caltrans helps us understand the cost, get us revised cost estimates, we'll make further decisions in the months and year to come to kind of really decide for all the network how much ends up being we can afford to build and how much and where it gets leased. Next slide. I think that's yeah. I'll introduce the Secretary for Governmental Operations Agency, Amy Tong.
Hi, Mark. Thank you for the introduction, and Matt earlier, good to see you, and Eric, and hello, everyone. First of all, let me apologize for coming in midstream. And as a secretary, I have many new demands and commitment on my schedule today, and I just have something I couldn't move this morning. And again, my apology for coming in midstream. But I'm here, and I'm really glad that I have an opportunity just to pop in and say hi. And I was able to catch a little bit of the earlier conversation between Matt and Eric. I wanted to just take a couple of minutes just to welcome everyone to the Broadband for All Roundtable, and here to say hello, to let you know that despite my new role, I am very much remain as committed as ever, seeing that Broadband for All is a success. I am pleased to see so many of our tribal government partners united around our common goals to close the digital divide and foster digital equity in our state and our tribal lands. Broadband is essential to modern life. And today, with school, work, and healthcare increasingly and often entirely available online, California's ability to access and use broadband is the differences between being able to fully engage in and being cut off. And yet, too many Californians and residents on tribal land still do not have the access they need. It is time to really try our very best to close the digital divide. We face complex and deep-rooted challenges to deliver broadband for all. Achieving broadband for all will require partnership with and support from the broadband industry and the federal, local, and tribal government. Schools and library and community-based organizations are critical partner in this effort. Thankfully, we are at the moment in time where federal and state policies, priorities, and funding are aligned around the goal we share. The state's Broadband for All program is based on the foundation that broadband access, adoption, and training are essential components of digital equity, and that digital equity is the goal for every Californian and residents on tribal lands. Today, you will hear more about the progress on California Broadband Council's member have made on the implementation of the Broadband for All Action Plan. We will provide updates. We will provide the updates on the state's historic $6 billion investment in broadband middle mile infrastructure, as you probably just heard from Mark, and the last mile grants program that the governor and the legislature created and funded last July with the passage of Senate Bill 156. You will hear from our partners at the Department of Treasury and the National Telecommunication and Information Administration about the federal broadband funding program that the state is seeking to leverage our digital equity efforts and specific allocations to support your nation's broadband effort. California is actively pursuing these funds to support our digital equity efforts and augment the effort that you are undertaking at the regional and local level. We are eager to expand existing partnership, create new partnership, and align efforts with yours to achieve broadband for all in California. Thanks again for having me, and I really, really appreciate your continued interest and passion in this arena.
Thank you, Secretary Tong, for your continued leadership on broadband in the state, and really your acknowledgement that to get broadband for all, it's really a comprehensive and holistic effort from both from the infrastructure, affordability, adoption, et cetera. So we really appreciate that. We would want to, we heard from the significant investments in the middle mile and really, creating the state's open access middle mile network to provide reliable, robust connectivity at the middle mile segment. Now you're going to hear from our partners at the Public Utilities Commission about the programs that they have to support last mile efforts that complement and connect to the middle mile. So Rob Osborne from the Public Utilities Commission.
Thank you, Scott. Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to provide an update on the CPUC's last mile broadband funding activities. And thank you to the staff of the Department of Technology for hosting this event. I'm Robert Osborne, Director of the Communications Division at the California Public Utilities Commission. As you can see, there's a lot of information here. And so if we run out of time to answer your questions, I'll be happy to follow up afterward. The Public Utilities Commission has been working on tribal broadband issues since 2010, and that began with an ARA capacity building grant from the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. That extended into 2014. But more recently, we were fortunate to have Governor Newsom appoint Ken Holbrook in 2020 to be the CPUC's tribal advisor. Ken has worked closely with one of my division's management, Karen Eckersley, whom you'll see later in this webinar, on tribal-related communications matters. As an example, the CPUC assisted 37 tribes in applying for the 2.5 gigahertz spectrum licenses back in 2020, and the majority of those applications have been accepted. The broadband legislation passed last year demonstrated the state's commitment to closing the digital divide by leveraging federal recovery funds to construct a statewide open access middle mile network and fund last mile networks. As Scott said, we're going to talk a little bit about last mile. The CPUC responded quickly by implementing this historic legislation by scoping the various funding programs assigned to the CPUC into two critical rulemakings, which I'll go into now. Next slide, please. So this slide provides an overview of the various funding initiatives in which the CPUC is involved pursuant to last year's legislative package. To begin, I'm going to summarize the group of last mile initiatives, and then I'll drill down into some more of the more relevant programs in later slides. So first is the broadband technical assistance, which is $50 million set aside to award. And this will be used to fund broadband studies and the like, and I'll go into that in a little bit of detail later. The second is the Loan Loss Reserve Fund, and this will enable outside financing for local government and nonprofits to deploy broadband networks. The fund has $750 million over 3 years. Third is the federal funding account, and this is the big one, sometimes called the last mile account, which has $2 billion allocated over 3 years. And then fourth, the California Advanced Services Fund, which is a program we've had for a while, that addresses broadband needs in a variety of areas, including adoption, which helps people who have infrastructure to get broadband, connectivity in public housing and other low-income communities, funding for regional planning and expert consortia, and legacy infrastructure grants, or grant program, I should say, with some statutory differences from the federal last mile program that I mentioned earlier. Next slide, please. So this is a rather busy slide, and I apologize for that. It is a graph that we got from an organization called US Ignite, and I believe we'll be providing these slides later so you can dive into this in a little more detail. But just as an overview, one of the challenges we've had, not just in California, but across the US, is how to incentivize broadband deployment in areas where private industry has been unable to justify the investment due to insufficient revenue or high capital operating expenses. As you know, during the 1930s, we solved the problem of electricity for all with the Rural Electrification Act, and we followed that with providing telephone service through federal and state high-cost programs. The circumstances today are a little bit different. Broadband is deployed to many areas, but we still have some communities, as you well know, without access or without sufficient access. And because of this, broadband policymakers are pursuing new deployment models. The key point here with this slide is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. So the table on this slide categorizes the various levels of public entity involvement along the value chain in the broadband networks in ways that may be helpful for grounding discussions about last mile programs. This table, as I mentioned, is from an organization called US Ignite, and it goes from the fully public model, which is in row 1 at the very top, where it says full municipal broadband, all the way down to a fully private model. And you'll notice that the columns divide the type of work that can be assumed by either a public or a private entity over the course of network development. The blue, as you'll see on the left, the blue shaded cells are work that the public entity does in each example, and the gray shaded cells are denote private entity activities. I want to highlight 2 points about this table. First, I want to note that for the bottom row, the full private provider, the public entity still manages the rights of way and the utility infrastructure. This may be stating the obvious, but public utilities have a role, our public entities still have a role no matter how broadband infrastructure is deployed. Second, the rightmost column, as you'll see, lists cities. So for example, in row 4, which is, it lists it as private developer open access. This is the city of Fullerton, and that is a California example of where a company called Sci-Fi Networks built a privately funded service-based competition network. And what that means is the private entity owns the infrastructure, but sells the access to that infrastructure to 2 or more internet service providers. So unlike today, where you may have the service provider owning the physical infrastructure that goes into your home, this is opening up that infrastructure. So it's essentially like a pipe, and you can have other providers offer internet service over that pipe. Now I'll move on to describing some of our last mile programs, but as we're going along, keep in mind how one or more of the programs may be applicable to your tribe's work. Next slide, please. So in 2020, the CPUC launched a Tribal Technical Assistance Grant Program to assist tribes in planning for broadband deployment on their land for feasibility studies, market studies, and business plans. By the end of December 2021, 30 grants were awarded for 16 tribes for a total funding allocation of about $1.87 million. The projects must be completed within 24 months. Next slide, please. So what do these grants fund? The grants go to assist California tribes in developing market studies, feasibility studies, and/or business plans, which support tribes in their pursuit of improved communications that are specified in the decision. How much are the grants? The grants shall not exceed $150,000 per tribe per fiscal year. The aggregate amount available for awards to all tribes shall not exceed $5 million. So that's the max that's allocated now, but there is flexibility to add more money to that maximum cap. And in terms of eligibility, the money is eligible to California tribes with or without federal recognition that demonstrate tribal leadership support and are eligible for the grants. Next slide, please. So these are some links to the tribal technical assistance. Again, we'll be sending the slides out, so you'll have access to that to find out more about this program. Next slide, please. So local agency technical assistance. This was modeled on the tribal technical assistance program that we launched in 2020. So there are some similarities, but there are also some key differences. So the broadband package tasked the CPUC with awarding $50 million in technical assistance grants to public entities and nonprofits to help them prepare to provide service in their communities. A local agency is broadly defined in the program rules, but it includes a city, a county, community service district, public utilities district, joint powers authority, and most importantly, a sovereign tribal government. The individual grants are no more than $1 million per application, but there's an expedited process of requests for less than $500,000, so less than $500,000. The funds can cover a range of pre-project costs to deploy last mile broadband, including environmental permitting, needs assessment, and strategic plans. Steps to be aware of. So the CPUC is preparing the program materials and processes to open a grant making window at the end of June, early July, and we're planning to host a webinar before then. Next slide, please. Loan Loss Reserve Fund. As I mentioned earlier, the broadband package committed $750 million over 3 years for loan loss reserve funds. The purpose of this fund is to assist local governments and nonprofit entities in securing financing. So think of it as seed capital so that they may build out their last mile broadband infrastructure. This reserve fund will provide collateral to local governments to enable better borrowing rates and terms for bonds issued to deploy infrastructure. So look for the CPUC to issue a straw proposal. We're shooting for August of this year and workshops following that to collaborate on the practicalities and details of the implementation. Next slide, please. So the last mile federal funding account, this is the lion's share of the last mile funding, the $2 billion. The CPUC adopted program rules earlier this year, so it was actually last month in April at the voting meeting on April 21st. The rules include an allocation by county of funds of this $2 billion tranche for last mile projects. The CPUC is targeting accepting applications by July, so look for data for interested applicants on priority or presumed eligible areas in the next month or two. And the data will be published on the commission website as well as distributed to the service lists of the Broadband for All proceeding. And as the last bullet notes, it's a good time to begin planning for these applications. Public entities can evaluate activities for a technical assistance grant, but I want to emphasize that the local technical assistance grant is not a prerequisite for applying for funding for this account. Next slide, please. So this next couple slides falls under the California Advanced Services Fund. As I mentioned earlier, there are several sub-accounts in this fund: adoption, consortia, infrastructure, broadband. There's also public housing, which I'll go into in a bit. So the program was updated and reinvigorated with a number of pieces of legislation last year. A proposed decision is actually up for vote today. So that's Commissioner Howe mentioned this, that she was going to the voting meeting. And that decision will modernize the program rules for a number of longstanding CSF programs. So the adoption account, as of December last year, had awarded 212 grants for adoption projects and 179 grants for digital literacy. Public housing or low-income communities, the account, we awarded 128 public housing adoption grants and 322 public housing infrastructure grants. Then the Consortia Fund, which funds the regional broadband experts, those rules are being updated as well. So a proposal finally for the infrastructure piece of this, which is just the general California Advanced Services Fund infrastructure. We're expecting to have that come out in probably the later of this second quarter. Next slide, please. So the broadband public housing account provides funding for the cost of inside wiring or connectivity within a public housing development. Among the changes that are being contemplated, the proposed decision would update delivered speed requirements and would increase the amount of funding that may be awarded to a project under ministerial review. And just a word about that, ministerial review means it doesn't have to go up to a formal commission vote, so it's generally processed faster. And the timing really for this, we're targeting applications for June and July, so late June, early July of this year. Again, I can provide links for this proceeding if you would like to learn more about this. And then the last slide, please. So finally, we've launched a broadband survey for local governments. This includes tribes, of course. As part of our outreach effort, the CPUC is conducting a survey to assess each community's broadband assets, as well as their needs and interest in the state programs. So we have this survey up. Again, there's a link here. I can put it in the chat. And we're aiming to get responses from you by May 30th. And this will help inform future proposals. So this concludes my remarks. Thank you. And back to you, Scott.
Thanks, Rob, and PUC for the just the ongoing partnership and coordination and the wonderful work that you folks are doing with the whole suite of last mile and broadband adoption programs that you administer. And I think for our tribal government, partners who are watching here, what we were really hoping to demonstrate is the programmatic approach that the state is taking to particularly the infrastructure needs with the middle mile, allocating funding to develop the open access middle mile network. And then, when you pair that with the last mile programs at PUC, there's a tremendous ability to build out. And then obviously PUC's got the adoption programs. Our next presenters from the California Emerging Technology Fund are going to talk about the federal government, the FCC's Affordable Connectivity Program, which is an essential tool for increasing affordability and broadband adoption rates. We understand that some of your tribal governments may not have robust connectivity to leverage this program. However, for those lands that are able to capitalize this, CETF is going to talk through the program and its opportunity. So
thank you.
Sunny and Susan.
Thank you, Scott, very much. It is an honor for the California Emerging Technology Fund to join with the state agencies, the California Department of Technology and the California Public Utilities Commission and Golden State Network to talk about why we have the infrastructure, which is to get people connected. So ultimately, the whole issue is, can we get people online so that the technology can help them in their daily lives, save time and save money. As we have been talking through the opportunities for deployment, we want to keep in mind that there are not only the state resources, but state resources through the CPUC fund regional broadband consortia that also should be reaching out to all of the tribal leaders to have an engaged conversation about last mile deployment. And in that, thinking about last mile, which is to connect households and all of the other locations and users, including anchor institutions along the path of deployment, we also want to share this opportunity of affordable broadband so that residents know how they can actually connect to the internet at an affordable price brought to you by the federal government. And so I am pleased to be able to introduce to you the CETF Senior Vice President, Susan Walters, to present this information.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking a couple hours out of your day for us to share this information with you. Let's go on to the next slide. There. So quickly, we're going to cover several points. I'll do a quick overview. We'll talk about the California Broadband Council Plan of Action and its connection to the Affordable Connectivity Program. We have a tracking process and want to talk about what the current numbers look like for ACP, and then some of the options for action. So let's go on. So some of you may be already familiar with the Affordable Connectivity Program, or as we refer to it, ACP. It's a $30 a month benefit unless you're on a tribal land, and those would be federally recognized, in which case it's $75 per month. So it is a generous subsidy, but we know, you have to have service there to be able to use this particular benefit. The eligibility, briefly, we have outlined here. It's participation in one of these programs or being able to qualify through an income level. And for ACP, it is 200% of federal poverty. One of the amazing benefits or designs for ACP is that if you are an existing Lifeline customer, you literally do not have to fill out an application. So I think we have probably the first example of a federal program where you don't have to have an application. It's actually easy in many cases. So that's the benefit. Let's go on to the next slide and talk about the California Broadband Council and how they are addressing this and how we want to be able to support achieving the goal of 5 million households enrolled in ACP. And you can see we have a couple benchmarks set, 90% by 2025 and 95 by 2027. So when we look at what's possible to do, of course, we see lots of opportunities for promoting ACP, whether it's the roundtables you're participating in today or having the ISPs through advertising increase awareness of ACP, or having the qualifying agency promote the program. And these are the agencies that have the qualifying programs. So CalFresh, Medi-Cal, so Department of Social Services, Department of Health Services, the tribal programs, and then, of course, all of these entities we hope to enlist to promote ACP, along with CBOs. So what we see in general is a need to increase awareness, both through what we call trusted messengers, as well as the creditable sources. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Let's go on to the next slide. So when we looked at EBB, the predecessor for ACP, right, the emergency broadband benefit, which was $50 a month, and then at the beginning of the year it transitioned to the $30 a month benefit as ACP. There were a few things that we noticed. One is that most of the people enrolling are using the benefit for their mobile phone. And so while I'm not ready to give up my mobile phone, I'm also not ready to give up my home internet. And it's important that we help people understand the benefit of both. And this is a new message for Lifeline, because Lifeline, for years, the recipients have been told it's one benefit, per household. So we really want to help that percentage shift the 30% for home internet really increase, as well as increase the number of people enrolled in the program. You can see the numbers below. As of last week, for the United States, the tribal land enrollment was incredibly low, just over 160,000. You know, we're looking for triple that, at least from the state of California, let alone from the country. So, and what you see, the graphic on your screen is a screenshot of a map that we have been putting together with Cal State Chico, and are now working with the California Department of Technology to make sure it's accessible in terms of the technology, for instance, for screen readers, and really allows full access. They will be adding it to the Broadband for All website, because it's a tremendous map that gives you information about enrollment levels. It will tell you by county, the number of people who are enrolled, and by zip code, the number of people enrolled. And what makes this especially useful is that it also tells you the number of eligible households. So you have them compared side by side, and you can really use this to tell if your outreach methods are working, you know, in not quite real time. We get the data from USAC, right, an arm of the FCC, and then we, you know, we'll get it posted. So and they typically issue the reports monthly. So it gives us pretty close in time data, and that's very helpful. Let's go on to the next slide. So what we want to be able to do, right, with our presentation, which is really a call to action, to engage with everyone who's participating on the call in one way or another to promote the ACP program. So let's make sure when that the last mile projects, right, are connected to the middle mile projects, and the middle mile projects are connected to last mile projects, that we're thinking about how to promote it, right? So those are the plans for adoption, that we're using media, both paid and earned media. Some of you may have heard the work that we've been doing with different counties and regions. In LA County, we were able to partner with the county in December and increase their enrollment in ACP 44% in that 1 month. So that was tremendous. We want to replicate that across the state. So the collateral that's used is very important. And it's even more important to have these different layers active in the same time frame. So that includes the community-based organizations, tribal governments, local governments. It's also, as many of you know, important to have materials that are in multiple languages, whichever media you're using. We also spend a great deal of time doing training sessions for the qualifying agencies. So when Department of Social Services has their CalFresh team enrolling people, they can also do a quick check and find out, do you have email? Do you have internet at home? Here's a flyer, or here's a website with more information about this tremendous subsidy. All right, and then part of what makes this all work well together is that CETF supports a call center. We are funding CBOs across the state that can answer questions about the ACP program, that can answer questions about how to enroll with an internet service provider. So we are preparing people to apply and helping them apply for ACP that really is provided by people in their community. So they're a trusted messenger, and that's very important. And then the more difficult part of the process really is enrolling with an internet service provider. And we're trying to provide a robust consumer education through that process. It won't be the last time somebody needs to sign up with an internet service provider. And hopefully they leave the conversations, you know, feeling like they will not be in a vulnerable position when talking to an internet service provider. let's go on. And I'll just finish up with the larger message we have, which is really the need to increase awareness around ACP. We have the goal of 5 million. We are, into it for 1.4. And we think that we can do that. So we're pleased with where we are, but we have a long ways to go. So raising awareness is essential. Having the creditable sources, so whether it's local agencies, state agencies, tribal governments, community-based organizations, really, those are all important in delivering the message, especially in context when somebody is doing something where internet may be useful. And then engaging with the most trusted messengers, the ones that are closest to the populations that are eligible for the ACP assistance. Those are who we look to as the trusted messengers. And we really want more people throughout the state of California involved in this effort. So I look forward to working with many of you, and we'll be in touch. Scott?
Thank you so much, Sunny and Susan, for the work that CETF does really across the spectrum on broadband, but particularly being a champion for broadband adoption and affordability at the Broadband Council. Wanted to, again, just underscore that the affordable connectivity is really a significant program and expansion of the emergency broadband benefit, and the large amount of funding, the $14.2 billion, means that the subsidy is going to be available for a significant period of time. So really would just encourage our partners on tribal lands where this is available to take advantage of this. And, any of us would are willing to provide, assistance on how to better leverage this program. Can we go to the next segment, please? So we're, what we have talked about thus far in the information we've shared is about the programmatic efforts at the state level, and how the state has allocated funding for infrastructure in the middle and the last mile to support adoption programs, the work we're doing on the ACP. But we have invited our federal partners to talk about some available programs specific to augment the state and to support tribal entities. And a really wonderful colleague from the PUC, Karen Eckersley, is going to join here. Can we go to the next slide? Just real quick, I'm not going to go through this whole slide because you're going to hear from folks, but there are additional federal programs in addition to what the state is doing that can augment your efforts, and particularly the Treasury's Capital Project Fund and a number of programs through the they came out of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act and that are being administered through the NTIA. And Karen, I'm going to hand it over to you, and thank you so much for agreeing to moderate the handoff between the panelists in this section.
Thank you, Scott, and good morning, everyone. I'm joining you from the traditional land of the Wiyot people. It's a beautiful day up here on the North Coast, as you could see from Matt's background. So the funding opportunities are huge right now, and it's tough to keep track of everything. I do want to say that these are pieces of the same puzzle. I'm glad that we're addressing the situation holistically and in a place that puts tribal nations in the driver's seat. The state programs that we talked about earlier fit together with these federal programs. Rob Osborne talked about our state technical assistance funds for tribes particularly, and please reach out if you need more information on those. We have representatives from the federal government here today with some specific actionable information. The first person I'd like to welcome is Nicolette Gerald from the Capital Projects Fund at the U.S. Department of Treasury. She has some information about the Capital Fund specifically for tribes. You'll need to apply no later than June 1st, and it looks like they want to hear from you as quickly as you can finish the application. So you'll want to pay attention to her remarks. After we hear from Ms. Gerald, we'll have some information from the folks at NTIA, who I know that a lot of you know quite well, Adam Geisler, Evan Feynman, and Sarah Blue. These are our people for tribal connectivity, BEAD, and the tribe-specific program for digital equity plan development. So thank you all for coming. We appreciate the thought you and your teams put into these programs, and virtually, thank you for coming to California. Ms. Gerald, can you kick us off, please?
Absolutely. Hopefully everyone can hear me all right. Do wish we were actually getting to visit you all in California. I'm sure the weather is much better over there right now than it is in DC. But thank you all for inviting me to be here. So as they mentioned, my name is Nicolette Gerald. I'm a policy advisor at the Department of Treasury, and I work specifically on the Capital Projects Fund. And I did provide slides. I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. Perfect. This is perfect. So today I'm just going to be giving you all a quick overview of the Capital Projects Fund here at Treasury. It is a fund in which tribal governments are eligible to directly apply for. And as Karen mentioned, the application due date is June 1st, 2022. So it's in about 2 weeks. So I'll walk through some of the background information and hopefully will make you all feel good enough to start applying right away, as we've made it kind of a seamless process. So if you can go to the next slide. And this is just to let you all know that this is just a brief summary of our guidance in every document that we have online. So I'm happy to answer questions after this, but also feel free to read through the guidance and any other tribal documents we have on our website. Next slide, please. So this just gives a quick background on the Capital Projects Fund. So before you apply, this helps you kind of know the intention of our project. So you can kind of input eligible projects that would help your community specifically. So first, the Capital Projects Fund was created through the American Rescue Plan Act last year in March of 2021. And it allocates about $167,000 to each tribal government that applies. The purpose of the fund is to support recovery from the public health emergency through strengthening and improving infrastructure necessary to participate in work, education, and health monitoring that will last well into the future. And for those of you who maybe have been on our tribal office hours or who have heard my presentations before, or anyone from Treasury, our big three are work, education, and health monitoring. If you're unsure if your project would be eligible, try to see if it fits those three. It has to hit all three, and then it would be most likely eligible. So the next part is that we are hoping that this will address inequities and access to critical services. And we want to provide every individual with modern infrastructure necessary to access these critical services that many of us experienced were difficult to access throughout the pandemic. So that's what Capital Projects Fund is hoping to alleviate. Next slide, please. So now that you have kind of the intention of our program and what we're hoping to help communities with, these are our presumptively eligible uses that you'll also see in our application. So there are three, and the first one is broadband infrastructure projects. The second is digital connectivity technology projects. These are, devices, so tablets, desktop computers, laptops, Wi-Fi equipment that would extend broadband or Wi-Fi access throughout your community. And lastly, we have multi-purpose community facility projects. So these are your community centers, buildings with wraparound services, or even libraries. So those are the three that we'll ask in the application. And then quickly to highlight some ineligible uses. So general infrastructure projects, highways, bridges, roads, water and sewer projects. Some of those can be You can use your state and local fiscal recovery fund for some sewer and water projects, but generally for capital projects fund, general infrastructure is an ineligible use. And in addition to that is general construction or improvement of hospitals or traditional schools. So next slide, please. So this is just some quick information on how to apply. As I mentioned at the beginning of this, we're trying to make this a seamless process. So in order to apply, I will post the link here shortly. It's my last slide of our website. You'll go onto that and you'll click this big button that says apply here, and that will take you to our submission portal. You will do everything in the application through that submission portal. There are 5 sections, and one of them is just an information section, so you don't even need to fill anything out. So we just ask some basic information to confirm your eligibility, and then, you know, bank information to make sure once you are approved, we can send you the money, and then information about your intended use of funds. And this is only about 1 to 3 sentences for each use of funds. So it's very quick. We just generally want to know that you're using it for our intended uses and that it's an eligible project. We most likely will ask a few clarifications if we're not sure, if it's a little vague. But the process is pretty quick, and Treasury is very responsive to any clarifications or updates that you make. Some very important reminders are the submission deadline, which is in about 2 weeks, so June 1st. I will say the application, once you sit down, if you have stable broadband, takes about an hour and a half, so it's not too lengthy. We do have some resources if you don't have as stable as broadband as you would need to fill out this application, to help you see what you need before you log in, so you can have all your info already ready to go. And I'm happy to provide those additional resources in the chat once we have some more time. But it is a fairly quick process. Treasury is really excited to work with all of you to get this money out to tribal applicants. And it's an iterative process. So once you apply, if you're not quite sure if it's eligible or not, Treasury will do a back and forth even after the June 1st deadline to make sure that the funds are eligible for our uses, but so that it also helps your community. So it is a very flexible process. And next slide. And this is our last slide, but I will say we have been reviewing and approving tribal applicants on a rolling basis. And we have, I'm really excited to announce that we are updating that as we go. So I think the most recent update was a few weeks ago. We have a long list of different projects we've approved. So that's a good place to go if you're not quite sure what type of projects you're looking at doing, or if it would be something that we would approve. That's a great place to go. And I'm happy to put that in the chat after this as well. But yes, I think next slide is our information slide. Or nope, we're just moving on next, which is perfect. But that is my quick and dirty summary of Capital Projects Fund. It's a very quick application, and we're here to answer any questions, and we're here to help you all get the money you need for your communities. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nicolette. I hope you'll be able to stay through our Q&A at the end of this. It'll just be a little while longer.
Absolutely.
So the messages are, the portal's open, it's ready now, and you'll be putting the link in the chat, right?
Absolutely.
Excellent. Okay. So let's move on to our friends at NTIA, Adam, Evan, and Sarah. I think you have some more information for us. You all live in virtual world almost more than the rest of us. So Adam, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Karen, and thank you for California. If I'm smiling big, it's because I'm really happy to see not only some of my federal peers like Nicolette, but also just the progress that's been made since the Tribal Broadband Summit that was held by the state last year. So, you know, big hats off to the team and the work that's gone into the things that you're doing. I've just been smiling as we've gone through and listening to the presentations today. So thank you to the California Department of Technology, Scott and your team. You guys are always great to work with. Obviously the CPUC for your coordination, the governor's office, Secretary Amy Tong, and then the California Emerging Technology Fund, Ms. Peak. It's always good to see you on these calls. And lastly, Chairman Mazzetti, who's been a peer of mine and a mentor of mine for a number years. I'm so glad that you are leading the charge as you kicked it off today. So it's great to see everybody. Miriam Chashik Trot Nom, Adam Geisler, Non Lonon Bayom Guchim and H's. What are we, 11:15? So good morning still. My name is Adam Geisler. I'm an enrolled member of the La Jolla Band of Luiseño Indians, and I'm coming to you today from our reservation of the Payom Quechua people here in North County, San Diego. And I'm joined today with a few of my colleagues within NTIA. I'm the division chief for the Tribal Connectivity and Nation-to-Nation Coordination Division, which is a specific business unit that's been stood up to manage the $3 billion to the Tribal Broadband Program. But I also have with me our Deputy Associate Administrator, Evan Feynman, who is going to be overseeing the implementation of the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. Leave it up to the feds, right? We have all these acronyms, BEAD. And also our acting director, Sarah Blue, who's overseeing the implementation of the Middle-Mile program, which are some new programs that have come through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, also known as IIJA, is the actual formal component there. So we'll go ahead and go to the next slide, and we're just going to jump in. So we'll keep going. One more. There we go. So there's a lot of money that has come through on the federal government side in terms of broadband in particular, actually over $65 billion, as Karen shared previously. NTIA is administering $48 billion of these funds. And today we're going to talk just very briefly on the different buckets that are available through the various programs. And so as a high overview, $42.45 billion is available in the BEAD program. That's going to be administered through the state. So if you're wondering about direct eligibility tribes, this is going to be a bucket of money where it was sent to the state, and there will be a need for a partnership, and Evan's going to cover that. I'll then dive into the digital equity piece. There is a set aside for tribes to apply for the digital equity component. There's an additional $2 billion. So as you heard me say a moment ago, I said $3 billion. That's $1 billion previously appropriated, $2 billion more that came through the infrastructure bill. So we have another $2 billion in the program. So I'm excited about that. And then lastly, we'll cover the middle mile with Sarah talking about the middle mile approach. And I think that given everything that we're hearing today, this is an awesome time to be talking about how the state work and commitment to solving the digital divide fits with the efforts that are being made by the federal government. I also do want to point to, again, as you guys just heard, the FCC has $14.2 billion. You're wondering where the rest of the 65 is at. USDA also has an additional $2 billion. And then there's going to be some private activity bonds as part of the overall investment package that the administration and Congress has put forward. So with that, we'll go ahead and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Evan, for an overview of the BEAD program. Over to you, Evan.
Thank you so much, Adam. I really appreciate it. And thank you everybody for being here. I'm going to try to go fast so that we have some time for Q&A. If I go too fast, please note that we've got a ton of information on our website, Internet for All. The BEAD program, as you've heard, is designed to deploy right around $42.5 billion for infrastructure planning and implementation. That is the primary use of the program for states that are able to complete their infrastructure mission and have funds remaining in their allocation. Those funds can be used for digital equity, digital literacy, affordability, and other programs of that nature. Universal broadband is absolutely critical. You've heard all about that today. We don't need to convince anybody post-COVID of that. We are going to get the job done. Unlike previous efforts, this is exclusively mission-driven funding and programmatic work designed to ensure that every single American gets online, period. How are we going to get that done? Partnerships. The watchword throughout this entire program is partnerships. That's partnerships, federal government to federal government. I'm extremely pleased that our colleagues from the Treasury could join us. Our funding programs and theirs are going to be braided together to ensure that we are working in a complementary fashion. But additionally, we are partnering directly with the states. There's a dramatically different model in this program than there has been in prior federal programs. We are working to empower state broadband offices to develop a plan to get to universal coverage, and then a plan for sub-grantee selection. And then we are supporting them throughout that entire development and subgrantee selection process, and then verification of the subgrantee work, so that all those grants go out and all of the good work gets done, and every single Californian, regardless of where they live, who they are, or whether or not their community has been supported or engaged with the state in the past, will be able to get online at the conclusion of the program. There's additionally going to be very strong state and local partnership. The notice of funding opportunity and the program requires an ongoing and robust collaboration and dialogue between local governments and the state. Beyond simple notice and comment, there simply must be an ongoing and robust dialogue, both with local governments and with tribal governments and with other key stakeholders. And we are going to need to see that live and be treated as just as critical a priority as every other program priority in this process. We're going to have two state broadband leaders on the ground in California. And in fact, our West Coast regional lead is also based in California. So California is going to be served very well by the NTIA staff throughout this process. But I also want, if there are concerns from members of the tribal community, members of local government, or other stakeholders that you don't think are being adequately addressed by the state broadband office, we certainly want to hear it on our staff, and then we'll figure it out in concert with the state broadband office. That said, you are incredibly fortunate to be Californians. The California team is very, very strong and has, as we've heard today, has a really good understanding of what's out there and what needs to get done. There are going to be a ton of opportunities for folks to engage with this process. The next big deadline is the letter of intent coming in by the 18th of July. Within a short period of time after that, the gears of the federal government turn somewhat slowly. Funds will be received by the state of California, at which point y'all will have 270 days to develop your 5-year plan. Next year, after the allocation comes out, which is driven by the FCC maps, those will determine how much each state gets of the $42.5 billion. The state of California will need to begin developing its initial proposal to us. And then after that, we'll issue some of the funds and the initial, and we'll work on the final proposal. We're contemplating a 4-year implementation period after that. Obviously, construction projects being what they are, workforce and supply chains being what they are, we'll need to see if that's an achievable target, but we're certainly setting that target right now. Moving on to the next slide. We've got our Digital Equity Act programs. You heard a little bit about that from Adam. Unfortunately, our Digital Equity Director couldn't join us today, but just please note there are really 3 phases to the Digital Equity Program. First is $60 million to the states to begin planning to engage these, and then capacity building grants to the states after that, and then a competitive round at the conclusion of that. And with that, I think we're now on to Middle-Mile and Sarah Blue.
Actually, I think, Evan, the next one is going to be tribal. Before we jump off of digital equity, no, it's all good. We're doing so many of these in a day now. It's fun to see the navigation of these decks. So the other thing I just want to point out, and I know that Scott is likely going to circulate a sample of the letter of intent. There is a specific set aside for tribes in the Digital Equity Act program itself, specifically not less than 5% of the funds that have been allocated to the state process are actually been set aside for tribes. So you can individually apply for the funds. The awards will range at this point somewhere between $50,000 and $150,000, depending on how many tribes show interest in the program. So step 1, similar to the state process, is submitting essentially a letter of intent. And again, I know that Scott has every intention of circulating that to everybody that's on the call today. In addition, tribes can directly compete in the competitive bucket of the $1.25 billion. So, again, as you're looking at all the options that are out there, you're looking at different pots of money to do different things. This is a really great opportunity to build capacity, work with your elders, look at the stakeholders that may be higher at risk, folks that are coming out of incarceration, individuals with disabilities, et cetera. Everybody should have a level of access, and that is what this program is really about. So I'll put that there on the table for a second. We'll go to the next one.
Well, I just want to emphasize, Adam, just one more time, because I know Angie would say it if she was here, and I want it to be very clear. Angie Bennett, our DE director, and I want to be very clear about the BEAD program as well. Those programs are designed to serve everybody, and that absolutely includes tribes. Tribes also have special consideration. If you are not consulted, that is a huge problem from our perspective. And that consultation is not a box checking exercise. Again, that needs to be genuine, authentic, ongoing collaboration.
Awesome. So isn't it, it's always great to see colleagues within the department, really embracing and understanding the intent of tribal consultation engagement. So hopefully we're demonstrating that here today across these programs. So I appreciate you doubling down on that, Evan. We'll go to the next slide, please. Oh, go back. Maybe I jumped one. Oh, next slide. I'm sorry, everyone. All right, so we have the technical amendment to the tribal broadband program. So as I mentioned, the tribal broadband program actually received an additional $2 billion. Initially, we were appropriated $1 billion through the Consolidated Appropriations Act. The bipartisan infrastructure law added an additional $2 billion. We are looking at taking a portion of this $2 billion and putting it towards the current round of applications that we have under review. The whole idea here is if we have good applications, why have people reapply? We also were really oversubscribed, 5 times oversubscribed for this program, had over 5 billion in requested projects with only $1 billion. So this extra pot of money is really going to help. The balance of that $2 billion that we don't put towards the current round is going to be put forward in a second NOFO later on this year, and that's what you'll see down on the bottom. I've also fielded some questions from you that have been emailing. I see a lot of really familiar names in the participant list. So if you haven't heard from us at this point, that doesn't mean that you won't hear from us. We're making these awards on a rolling basis. We received over 301 applications, but that's 424 projects that we've been making our way through. So I appreciate the patience and everybody's patience as we move our way through the implementation of this process. As always, if you guys need any assistance, please feel free to email me. I've put my email in the chat. So with that, we'll move on to the last program here, which is the $1 billion for Middle Mile. Sarah Blue, which is another one of our directors. Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you if you don't mind covering this last portion here.
Yes, yeah, of course, no problem. Thank you, Adam. And I'll speak very quickly. I don't know how long I'll be able to stick around for Q&A because I'm doing another webinar in just a few moments about the Middle Mile program. But please send the questions and as best as we can answer them, we will. What I'll say really quickly, I think everybody understands there's the state of California has done an outstanding job with Middle Mile in general. And Middle Mile is that piece that connects the internet backbone to the end users. I think what's most important on this slide is, number one, we posted the notice of funding opportunity for the Middle Mile program last week with BEAD and DE. And we will open up the application for the Middle Mile program on June 21st. We will accept applications until September 30th. And the most exciting piece of news on this program, as far as I'm concerned, is that we will be making awards in a year from now. We will have money available. It's going to, this project is going to hit the ground running. It is a competitive grant program. We only have $1 billion available, and that is not going to be enough. So while the other important piece that I'd like to talk about here is that we have a list of eligible entities for the Middle Mile program, including tribal governments, state and local governments, telecommunications companies, nonprofits. We also encourage partnerships. There's a number of factors that we're going to be looking at with the Middle Mile program, including the level of need. And finally, we will be looking at the geographic distribution and the size of the grants being requested. I would encourage work together. We can have a partnership of several, 3, 5, 10 tribal governments working together. We can have tribal governments working with state and local government. We can have tribal, local state governments working with nonprofits. I think that because this is a competitive program, this is going to take all of us. Getting high speed and affordable internet to all Americans is going to take all of us. And so I strongly encourage, we've been talking about partnerships. I encourage you to work with different governments, work with nonprofits, work with the utility companies, telecommunications companies so that you can develop a partnership as you look at the application for the Middle-Mile program. Thank you, Adam.
Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Just to double down on that, the state is doing amazing work. Scott and his team, the CPUC, you guys have really laid out an incredible blueprint that I think is going to fit all of these programs nicely. So just to double down on that last piece, the partnership is the buzzword of I think today. I think California is already doing that, and you're positioned nicely to be successful. So anything we can do to help, we're here. Obviously, you guys know I'm here in California, many of you, and we have other members on the team. It's important that we see connectivity across the state, and we're here to support that. So with that, Karen, thank you again, and thank you to the state, the governor's office, CPUC, everybody that's come today. Obviously, the honorable tribal leaders that are here for your time. And with that, we'll turn it back over to you, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Let me see if I can do a kind of a quick summary. Lots of charts, lots of information here. So more money in the Tribal Connectivity Fund. We're now at $3 billion. Yay, keep that coming. You've got the applications, seeing a lot of questions. Can't wait to come out of that machine. There's Evan, there's 2 NTIA staff in the West Coast lead in California. So we're looking forward to having those contact details and telephone numbers. There is a letter of intent for tribes for the set aside for the digital equity plans, some amount of money. This group will get a sample and instructions on how to do that, send it off right away. On the BEAD information, there's a lot of collaboration that's required, not just notice and comment. Yay, you aren't just expecting the usual letter in a Dropbox. Thank you for that. Let's see, I'm seeing some questions in the chat here. I don't know if you guys want to make any last remarks before we head to the general Q&A, because we got a lot of questions.
Yeah, I'm seeing, it looks like Robert Say, thanks for the question, Robert. Can BEAD and other NTIA programs be used to connect tribes that are not directly on the California Middle Mile route? Yes, absolutely. I think that's 100% what we're asking to do, whether it's the BEAD program. Evan, I'm just going to speak for a quick second. The whole point is to connect every single house across California, including on tribal lands, without crossing that line. We all recognize tribal boundaries, sovereignty, et cetera, but holistically, we are looking at this process to ensure every household has a minimum of 25/3 access, minimum, but we actually want to ramp that sucker up to 100 down and 20 up, or even 100 symmetrical if possible, which I think that the plan that you're looking at here, every 2,500 feet with the type of backhaul you guys are running, I think you're well on your way. So yes, you can use NTIA programs to interconnect to backbone or middle mile, absolutely. All these programs are intended to do that.
Yeah, Adam, one quick correction. We're prioritizing the folks below 25/3, but we're building to everybody who's not at 100 over 20.
Yep.
And so we've got to get everybody to that level at least. And of course, more capacity is better.
Always, exactly. And Karen, very impressed by your rollout back. That was great. You got it all.
There's a lot coming on here. I'm like, which is the stuff I got to remember here? So thank you all for that. Scott, Laura, do you want to take generalized questions now for the whole thing, or do you want to move into some other directed Q&A?
Well, first of all, just thanks to our federal partners, and thank you, Karen. I think that I've been looking at the chat, and I think staff and the presenters have been doing a pretty good job of moderating or responding to those questions. What I think, what I would suggest we do is let's open up to the general Q&A. I know staff has been, tracking some that they specifically wanted to hand over, and then aside from the written ones, we'll probably just unmute folks and ask them to raise their hands if they have any specific questions related to any of the agenda items that we've covered that haven't been addressed or answered yet. Okay, so I would hand it over to Cole, but ask our federal partners to stay.
Alex, why don't you go ahead and open up that Q&A with the first question?
Thanks, Scott and Cole. So the first question goes to Rob. This question comes from Erica. My tribe owns land that we are developing for housing. It's not in trust. Can we take advantage of this funding? And I think this came in during the CASF broadband public housing account discussion.
So I know that there's legal issues around trust versus other types of land. So I don't want to answer that yet because I don't know the answer. So I'd be happy to follow up with you though. So I'll send you my email and then I'm happy to follow up.
Great, thanks, Rob. Let's move on to Treasury and Nicolette. There were a couple of questions that came in during your presentation. The first one comes from Sorna. Her question is, are energy infrastructure projects permissible?
Great question. Generally, they are not. So as I said, there are the couple prong tests. So is it one of our 3 presumptively eligible, which would be the broadband digital devices and then the multi-purpose community facility? So that's one test to see if it's an eligible project, but then also does it directly enable work, education, and health monitoring? And general infrastructure projects are not eligible under CPF.
Thanks. This next question comes from Frank. Are tribal nations eligible for new market tax credits from Treasury?
I'm going to be honest and say I actually do not know the answer to this one. I would love to follow up via email about this, but I'm not quite sure that this is specific to Capital Projects Fund.
Thanks, Nicolette. Let's move on to Adam and NTIA. Just one question that came in earlier. This question comes from Sam. Can the state of California work with the federal NTIA to ensure that each California tribe receives federal funding of at least $500,000 for broadband for each California federally recognized tribe?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Mr. Cohen. Hope you guys are doing well up there at Chumash. We're happy to talk with the state of California, but I mean, honestly, the relationship between the tribes and the federal government is a government-to-government relationship. So, Mr. Cohen, if you have any questions about the up to $500,000 equitable distribution of the tribal broadband program, I'm happy to take that offline. But what I will say is, again, if you haven't seen your tribe awarded, that does not mean that they are not going to be awarded. You guys are starting to see the rollout happen, and you're going to see awards in all shapes and sizes here over the next couple months as we continue our rollout. So that's probably the best that I could do. And again, Mr. Cohen, if you have additional questions, happy to chat with you offline. Hope you're doing well as well.
All right, thanks, Adam. So those are all the unanswered questions from the Q&A. Now let's open it up to folks to raise their hands if you want to answer or ask any questions. During this time, we can unmute you. So let's just give folks a minute or two to raise their hands. And once we see that, we'll unmute you.
If you guys don't mind, do you mind if I just say one last thing I completely forgot to mention during my presentation?
Yep, go ahead, Nicolette.
And this might bring up some great questions as well. Capital Projects Fund in an updated FAQ recently decided to allow tribal governments to use their $167,000 allocation towards planning purposes of another grant that would be an eligible CPF expense. So as you guys are thinking about some of these other grants through NTIA or what have you, it's also really good to know that CPF can be used for planning purposes for those other projects.
Thank you, Nicolette. This is Cole Prisabella. One thing I wanted to note as we're doing hand raisings is if you do not know how to find the hand raising, it's down at the bottom where it's reactions. If you collect reactions, there is a raised hand button. And with that, it looks like we have a raised hand. So I am going to unmute you, Will Micklin. You should be able to unmute.
All right, can you hear me?
Yep, go on ahead.
Great, thank you. Thanks for the roundtable and the opportunity to ask questions. Will Micklin, I'm CEO for the Wuyupai Band of Kumeyaay Indians. We're a federally recognized tribe in East San Diego County. The reservation is off-grid to all utilities, including telecom and electrical grid. We have a application into the USDA, NTIA, TVCP, and to, the Department of Commerce, the TVCP and the USDA Reconnect. We've deployed our capital projects fund in support of those efforts. My question is, we have fairly expensive project proposals to extend from the tribal community that's again off-grid through the middle mile to reach high-speed broadband services. The tentative map from the Broadband for All shows a route for improvements for broadband facilities along Interstate 8. I don't know if those are improvements of the existing fiber run or additional. There's nothing to our northwest, which would be S1 or Sunrise Highway. That's a 3-mile run and twice the cost. That's a 3-mile run that's half the cost of the south run to Interstate 8. Is there a way to work with the project planning for the Broadband for All to determine if there's a feasibility for broadband runs that are not currently shown, and to better understand the projects that are shown, in order to better understand that when we're awarded the broadband deployment funds, we can reasonably find high-speed broadband services at the end of our middle mile transport?
Thanks for that question, Will. And I think this would be a great opportunity for Mark Monroe, if you are available to answer a question, and maybe and Eric as well. Mark?
Yeah, sure. I'm thinking, I'm sorry, I've been spending a lot of time looking at the maps. This is, are you saying it's around the Calexico area, right?
So we're in East San Diego County. We are southeast of the unincorporated community of Mount Laguna. We are directly north of La Posta, Manzanita, and Campo. Campo south of I-8, and Manzanita and La Posta are north of I-8. We're above La Posta. We're at between 5,000 and 6,400 feet in elevation.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't want to go to too far. Let me ask you this, if you could send us the kind of the details, I think that would be helpful. It sounds like you've hopefully been to the MMBI website, where you will see the Public Utilities Commission map that they had produced based on in part on all the public input that they put together. And identifying the unserved and underserved locations. Then hopefully you will have found the Golden State Net's kind of system level design map that was kind of more network based. And what I'll say is that we're looking at moving out with a broader map that really combines the two tomorrow. And so you're looking in the right place in terms of the Middle-Mile Broadband Initiative website to kind of identify those locations. But it will be helpful if you could email both Eric Hunsinger of Golden State Net and myself or Scott, any specific information. I think that'll kind of help prepare us for that discussion.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Will. Thank you.
Mr. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr.
Thank you.
Mr.
Micklin, I also wanted to say that thank you for sharing the details, of the particular challenges at our recent consultation. And like Mark said, we'll be emailing you directly to set up further consultation to discuss this particular project. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Will. The next hand raised I have is Ray. Ray, I'm going to allow you to talk, and you should be able to unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So my question is a simple one. That woman who just came on before this Q&A began to clarify on the capital projects funding that's due June 1. Did I hear her correctly? Did she say that the scope of that funding has been expanded to include planning as opposed to straight up like shovel ready or hard construction work, but that, or equipment, but that we can also request money to plan and develop a feasibility if we're not sure? There's a project we're thinking of that involves modifying, improving a community center or towers. We're still trying to figure, but we may need planning funds for that purpose. Is that possible?
So yes, this is Nicolette from Treasury. So that is a great clarification. So we expanded that with the thought of tribal governments planning for future grant purposes. However, we understand that $167,000 is not a lot in many cases to, even renovate a current building that you all own. So if Treasury may ask for clarification about, are you using what type of funds to continue that project, but you would also be able to use the funds for planning purposes for a community facility, because again, we understand that's not a ton of money that's going to build a brand new facility, right? So there may be a few clarifications that they may request, but generally that is an eligible use of funds.
Excellent. So in other words, we could take this money. It seems to me it would certainly be enough. I'm a planner grant writer with the Yurok tribe, so it seems it would be certainly enough to retain a consultant to assist us in developing feasibility as we analyze a couple of different sites and purposes of this money. We know the need, we know what we'd like to do, but we're trying to figure out, what could work best. So thank you for that clarification.
Absolutely. And I will paste the frequently asked questions link with which number it is so that everyone can reference that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for your question, Ray. And with that, we have no more raised hands unless I see one in the next 5 seconds. And I'm also going to say there was one more Q&A question about how to be prepared, as there's very much a lot of interest in the capital projects funds and how they prepare an application. And Nicolette, it looks like you put a link in the chat, but I will also put that link right into the answer for the Q&A as well. So we'll have it in 2 places. If we have any more questions or no raised hands, we're still going to offer that opportunity. And Alex, since we've got a moment while we're waiting for a raised hand, do you want to ask a question to one of our panelists or have Scott join?
Yeah, since we have a moment, there are a couple of questions from the pre-survey that we could have folks answer. How about we start with this one for Scott, and Scott, feel free to pass it on to some of the other panelists. The question is, does this effort include a wealth building opportunity or a component for minimum wage workers?
Oh, that is a good question. And when we talk about the plan, it's a big plan. I would say that there's a huge economic development and workforce development component, particularly that will be addressed during the BEAD planning. So I think I would probably say, Adam, do you or Evan, do you want to build on or expand on this and question?
Yeah, well, I'll just say under BEAD, if you look in the notice of funding opportunity, a riveting document. I recommend everybody keep it by their bedside. There are some very strong labor standards incorporated. That's a priority for this administration, and so we are ensuring that the many new employment opportunities that are created through these funds will pay an excellent wage, and that while we want to make sure that these projects are as efficient a use of federal funds as possible, we are creating a strong disincentive. It will hurt your project's competitiveness if you make your project competitive by underpaying your staff. That's not going to be an approach that, or your subcontractors. That's not going to be an approach that we are going to support. We're going to make sure that all the jobs created by this spending are good jobs.
And I'm just to dovetail on that, Scott, and thanks for the question. I think that's a great question. TARO and compliance with tribal employment rights offices and force account wage rates are absolutely a component of this as well. So there's also a level of respect in the way that tribes do business and recognizing tribes set their own labor standards, which, as we know, tribes take care of their people. So we're not real concerned about that, but that does also come into play with BEAD, TBCP, digital equity, and middle mile.
Great, thanks everyone. I see another hand raised, Sorna Lee. Cole, can you unmute?
Sorna, you should be able to speak.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for this opportunity. This is Sorna Lee. I'm the Chief Financial Officer for Scott Valley Band of Pomo Indians in Northern California. We are a rural tribe without any trust land, and so some of the trust land questions that have been brought up are specifically relevant to us as well. But the purpose of my following up is, I think the fact that capital improvement funds can be used for planning is going to be a huge opening for a lot of tribes, particularly ours. So I was hoping Nicolette could just expand a little bit more on how would, in the application process, how do we identify we're doing that for planning instead of one of the three options that were brought up previously? And secondarily to that, in regards to planning for future grants, do those future grants have to be specific in nature, like only ones that have to do with middle mile, for instance, or can those be for any upcoming grant that we need assistance with on infrastructure?
It's a great question. It almost sounds like I have you guys teeing up the next part of this FAQ. So that's a great clarification as well. I will say, with the planning purposes expansion of CPF grant funds, that specifically allows you to plan for something that would have been an approvable CPF project to begin with. So it does still need to fit within our three prongs of enables health, monitoring, education, and work, which, broadband Treasury automatically assumes does those three. Community centers would do that. Digital devices would do that. So planning for grants, like some of the ones we've talked about today, that would be an eligible use of funds specifically. But to clarify, it would need to be something that would have originally been a CPF acceptable use of funds.
Great, thank you. And that, as I understand, basis would include a feasibility study. And is that a feasibility study that can be done, do you know, on fee land that's not yet in trust?
That's a great question. I'd love to follow up with you. I'm not quite sure. We would have to have the team kind of look at the details of that. And I realized I also missed the part of the question where you asked how you would notify that it would be for planning purposes on your application. So online, to answer that, when you fill it in, because it still would need to be one of the three presumptively eligible uses, you would put it, say you're planning for an NTIA grant, you would put it in, the broadband section, and you would say, we're using funds to plan to expand fiber on, our tribal reservation. And then we have a section that asks, are there other grants that you're planning to use with this? And then you would just input that there. You don't have to have an award quite yet, but any information that you can provide us will give us the knowledge and the comfort of approving those funds. So that's how you would do that online. But to your follow-up question, I would love it. I'll put my email in the chat. If you could follow up with me, that would be great, because I'm not quite sure.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much, Nicolette. We have another question from the pre-survey about the ACP, so I'll direct this to Susan and Sunny. How are tribal members that live off reservation eligible?
Question. They are eligible by the other guidelines that exist on the program. I listed them, on the slide. So SNAP, Medicaid, Medi-Cal here, the supplemental security income, perhaps income overall if they wanted to qualify and they meet 200% of federal poverty or below. They could be a participant in WIC. All of the regular eligibility requirements would apply to anyone who's not living on a tribal land.
Got it. Thanks, Susan. So yeah, we have just a little bit of time left. We want to leave a little bit of time for folks who have any remaining questions to raise their hands so we can unmute you. We'll just pause for a couple of seconds here for folks to do that. Last call for questions. All right, Scott and Nicole, I'm not seeing any raised hands. So I think we can transition to the close. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, everyone. Jeffrey, can you bring up the, thank you so much. Just really quickly wanted to reiterate so much thanks and gratitude to our state leaders, Christina Snyder, Chairman Mazzetti, Commissioner Howe, who opened up today's roundtable. Wanted to thank all of our presenters and the work that goes into, not only preparing the presentation, but to doing the work to, that's so critical to completing this program. Want to thank our staff and all of the, partners here and tribal governments in California. A quick closing note is that all of the post-roundup follow-ups, we will be sending out a post-event questionnaire. Attached to that will be a template for the Capital Project Fund application and a template for the tribal allocation for the state digital equity planning. The event recording, the slides, and a transcript will be posted on the Broadband for All portal. And do want to note that the Middle-Mile Advisory Committee, which is the committee that Mark Monroe and Golden State Net provide updates to on the Middle-Mile is tomorrow. And I think there'll be some interesting information delivered there. And then the next California Broadband Council is next Wednesday. If you have any questions from our office, our email is going to be on the slides that we will send out and make available. And I wanted to hand it over to Christina Snyder. And again, Christina, thank you so much for your leadership and putting this together and being the connective tissue between the state agencies and our tribal government partners and really being just playing a key role in developing and building that partnership. So thank you, Christina.
Thank you, Scott. So I'll close us out. And I just wanted to thank Scott and your team and all of the federal partners who joined us today, and all of the tribal partners who came prepared with really great questions. Adam and I were chatting, and it's just amazing to see how much progress has been made since we last did our big convening. And so it's very cool to see that there's all this opportunity, and it's just how do we implement in the way that makes sense for everybody. So we are very excited that we're in the middle of a very good opportunity with a very good partner in the federal government. So want to make sure that you're all continue to be engaged in these conversations. I know that we're planning on having these be more regular check-ins. So the idea is that as these opportunities progress and as we move forward, we will have these kinds of roundtables every few months. So really, again, appreciate all of the work that went into standing this up, and really great to see some good friends again. One last thing, because I just can't contain my excitement, is I did want to share, for those of you who didn't hear, we finally got our first Native American federal judge in California. So Judge Sykes was just confirmed by the Senate yesterday and will be sworn in soon. So we're very excited about that. And in a time where it feels like we need a bit better representation on the bench. It is a very exciting time for Native people everywhere. So I'll close out with that. Thank you all again. I don't know if anyone has any final comments, but I think that's it. And we'll end a bit early and everyone can get to their lunch.